I think one of the 5 love languages are French.
That's awful. That is an off-the-wall question.
I didn't know there were 5 of them. I never knew there was one of them, to be honest with you.
5 love languages. I don't know, like French? Like real languages?
Compliments, words, encouraging words, making sure that they're not being phony about it, but they're the kind of person that feels that it's always important for someone to know how special they are.
Well, here we are again, and this week we're going to look at love language number 3, receiving gifts. By now we've got the words flowing, we're affirming each other verbally, we're giving quality time, right? And now we're going to come to receiving gifts. Some years ago, I did an anthropology field trip on the island of Dominica in the Caribbean, and I met a young man by the name of Fred. Fred only had one hand. He had lost his other hand in a fishing accident. Fishing with dynamite, not a good idea, and against the law in this country. So Fred didn't have a regular job, so I spent a lot of time with Fred. I was there for a month, and he taught me a lot about his culture. But whenever he heard I was leaving to come back home, he said to me, "Mr. Gary, you go home tomorrow?" I said, "Yes, Fred, I unfortunately got to go home tomorrow." He said, "Come to my house. I have a gift for you." And I'm thinking, gift? There's not a store within 30 miles of this village. How could he have a gift? But I went to his house. He came out to greet me with his hand behind him. He said, "Mr. Gary, I have a gift for you." And he pulled out a stick about 18 inches long. It was very smooth. The bark was gone. He said, "This stick has lived on the shores of Dominica for many years, and the waves have beaten it against the rocks. I want you to have it to remember Dominica." That was over 30 years ago. I still have the stick. I met a lot of people on that field trip whose names I've long since forgotten, but I've never forgotten Fred. Fred gave me a gift. You see, a gift is a visible sign of love. You know, in the wedding ceremony, typically the minister will say, "These rings are outward and visible signs of an inward and spiritual bond which unites your 2 hearts in love that has no end." Now that's not empty talk. That's based on the reality that symbols communicate emotional love. But let me remind you that gifts are more important to some people than to others. And that's why if some men take their rings off, their wedding rings off, to play sports or things, some wives get furious. Now, otherwise, it's not a big deal. Now, why would she get furious? Likely because her love language is receiving gifts. You're going to take off her gift? She gave that to you. It's like rejecting her. So if we understand this, we'll understand why some people respond more favorably to gifts than others do. The gift means more emotionally to them. To the individual whose primary love language is gifts, it really doesn't matter how much the gift cost, unless it's totally out of character with how much you can afford to give. You know, if a millionaire always gives his spouse or her spouse, a $1 gift, they'll begin to wonder if they're really expressing love to them. But really, it doesn't matter how much it costs. Haven't we always said it's the thought that counts? But I remind you now, as I did in our first session, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head that counts. But what of the person who says, "But I'm just not a gift giver. I mean, I didn't receive many gifts growing up. I've never learned how to give gifts. This is hard for me." Well, let me say first of all, congratulations, because you've just made a great discovery that you and your spouse have different love languages. Now that you know that, get on with the business of learning the language of giving gifts. The good news is, this is one of the easiest love languages to learn. Now, the people who don't give gifts say, "Wait a minute, this is not going to be easy." I can tell you it is easy. Let me give you some ideas. First of all, make a list of the gifts that you have heard your spouse comment on through the years. Maybe you gave them, maybe a family member gave them, but they said, ooh, ah, ooh, ooh, I really like this. That tells you the kind of gifts that they would like to receive. I'll give you another clue. Recruit your spouse's sister or brother. They know them. They likely know what they would like, and they would be happy to buy the gift for you, especially since they're spending your money. So recruit the family to help you if it's hard for you to buy gifts. In the meantime, you give whatever is comfortable for you to give. You have some idea. You've given some gifts through the years, so just do what's comfortable for you. Really, whatever you give them, I can assure you, if this is their primary love language, it will communicate love to them. Now, if they complain about your gifts or they're critical about your gifts, then I can tell you receiving gifts is not their love language. Because if it's their love language, it really is the thought that counts, and they're going to be pleased with anything you give them. Now, let's go back to another idea. You remember I've been talking about notebooks? Well, let's get a little gift notebook where you write down the comments that your spouse makes about gifts. For example, if they say, you hear them say to their sister or their brother, someday I'm going to get one of those. Write it down, man. You got a good idea. They're telling you what they want. So when they make comments about things they would like to have, and they say, I'd really like to have one of those. You might even sit down with them and take a catalog and just kind of thumb through it some night. You can spend a little quality time. You get beside them, a little physical touch maybe too. And you flip the pages and just listen. And if they make comments about something, I'd like to have one of those. Be sure you put it in your notebook. Keep a list of the kind of things they make comments about. Then you have wonderful ideas because they've already told you that's what they would like. To speak this love language, you may have to change your attitude about money. Most of us come into marriage with one of two ideas about money. Some of us are what we call spenders. That is, we feel good about ourselves when we're spending money. It's just nice to be able to spend money. We feel secure and feel good about ourselves when we're spending money. And others of us come into a marriage with a saving and investing orientation. We feel good about ourselves when we're saving money and investing money. And typically those two people marry each other. And so if you are a spender, then you won't have any trouble buying gifts. It'll be easy for you because your attitude is positive about spending. But if you're a saver and an investor, then it may be difficult for you to buy gifts. Because see, your reasoning, well, I don't buy gifts for myself, and why should I buy gifts for them? I mean, what's the big deal? Let's save some money, Well, there's one problem with that. You do buy gifts for yourself. In saving and investing, you are purchasing self-worth and positive attitudes about yourself. You're meeting your emotional need by saving, but you're not meeting their emotional need because you're not giving, and that's their primary love language. So you may have to change your attitude about money. Actually, if your spouse's love language is receiving gifts, then when you purchase gifts for them, you're making a wonderful investment. You are investing in the relationship. What could be more important? You can get a big bank account, but if you lose your spouse, So let's invest in the things that are important to us. And remember that all gifts do not cost money. The next time you take a walk through the neighborhood, think gifts. I'm going to look for something I can take home and give to my spouse. It may be a stone, it may be a rose, it may be a little twig, and you can attach meaning to it. You take a smooth stone home and you say, honey, I found this. It reminds me of our marriage. We've got some of the rough places smooth now. We had some rough years. It's getting better. This reminds me of our marriage. Or the rose reminds me of how beautiful you are. Or the little twig. This reminds me, honey, that our marriage is growing. We're better than we were last year, right? We're growing. So it didn't cost anything, but it was a gift. Because you thought about them, you brought it home, you gave it to them, and you told them the meaning that you attached to it. And then there is the gift of presents. being with your spouse, particularly in times of celebration and times of crisis. I remember the wife who said to me some years ago, she said, "Gary, my husband loves softball more than he loves me." I said, "How did you come to that conclusion?" She said, "Well, the day the baby was born, he left me at the hospital, went to play softball." I said, "You mean he brought you to the hospital and didn't even stay till the baby was born?" She said, "Oh, no, he stayed till the baby was born. But as soon as the baby was born, he left and go play softball." So here I am all afternoon in the hospital lying there with my new baby just celebrating, and he's over there, you know. She said, "I don't get it. It's like he has the attitude, you know, babies are born every day. I mean, you know, this is a big deal. We had a baby. I want him to be here with me." Well, you understand what she's asking for? It's not quality time. Her language was not quality time. It's that on special occasions, the gift of his presence was what she wanted. She wanted him to share in the joy of that moment. Now, it's also true in crisis moments. Like if your spouse experiences the death of their parent or a sibling or a close friend, your being there is more important than anything else. In fact, if you're on a business trip or you're out of town and your spouse calls and shares a crisis with you, don't ever ask the question, "Honey, do you want me to come home?" What you say is, "Honey, I'm coming home. As soon as I can get there, I'll be there." I'll tell you, they will remember that 40 years from now. And if you don't come home in the crisis, chances are they'll remember that 40 years from now. And it's especially true if gifts is their primary love language. So the gift of your presence, especially in times of crisis and in times of celebration, can really be a powerful expression of love. Now let me say this. If having your spouse with you is really important to you, I hope you'll tell them. Like if you're going in for a doctor's appointment and you're going to get a report on a lab test and you really want your spouse to be there, I hope you'll tell them, "Honey, if there's any way, I would really like for you to be with me this afternoon when I get that report." Don't sit around expecting them to read your mind, you know, and then you go to the doctor and sit there and resent them, you know. "Well, I thought they would know that I want them to be here." I can tell you, folks, they cannot read your mind. You know, tell them, "It's really important to me that you be here for this occasion." If their presence is important to you, be sure they know that. Well, does it really make a difference to give gifts if that's your spouse's primary love language? Let me tell you the story of Jim and Janice. I met them in Chicago. I had done my marriage seminar, and they had volunteered to drive me to the airport and to take me to dinner on the way to the airport. So as we were riding to the restaurant, she said, "Dr. Chapman, when we get to the restaurant, I'm going to tell you the story about our miracle." I thought, okay, this ought to be exciting. I like miracles. Well, we sit down, and she says, "I just want to tell you what happened in our marriage." She said, 3 years ago, we came to your seminar for the first time. She said, "To be honest with you, we were both pretty discouraged." She said, "In fact, I was really discouraged." She said, "You know, I tried to be a good wife. I did the things I thought a good wife would do." But she said, "Our marriage was just dead." She said, I didn't feel loved. I just felt like he didn't care about me." And she said, "It really was a pretty sad situation." We went to your seminar, and I was really glad that he went with me. She said, "But throughout the day, he didn't say a word to me. He just listened, and she said, we laughed a lot with everybody else. We laughed. We got home that night, and he didn't say a word. Didn't make a comment about the seminar at all." She said, "But on Monday afternoon, when he came home from work, he brought me a rose." And I said, "Oh, well, this is nice. Thank you." She said, "The next afternoon, he called me about 1 o'clock and said, 'Honey, what if I bring home a pizza tonight? And you don't have to cook.' And she said, 'Oh, well, that would be great.' She said the third night he came home with Cracker Jacks for the kids, and he had me a little potted plant. And he told me that he knew the rose would die and he wanted me to have something that would last a little longer." She said on Thursday afternoon he came home, and after dinner he handed me a card. And he said, you know, I don't know how to express myself sometimes, but I think this card will tell you how I feel about you. She said, I read the card and I started crying. And I just reached out and hugged him. She said, after dinner, he said, why don't we get a babysitter and Saturday night we'll go out for dinner? And she said, oh, well, that would be great. And she said, Friday night he came home and he brought each of us, the kids and me, our favorite cookie and told us that after dinner he had a special treat for everybody. And he gave us our cookie. She said, well, by Saturday night when we went out to eat, I was in orbit. I didn't know what was going on. And she said, I said to him after dinner, I said, Jim, you got to tell me, man, what is going on? And I looked, and she looked at me and she said, Dr. Chapman, you got to understand, this man had not given me a rose since the day we got married, not a flower. He had not given me a gift, really, except for my birthday and Christmas. It was the only time he gave gifts. She said he had never brought a pizza home. And she said, we had been out to eat, I think, once in the past year. She said, you have to know how radical this was. So I turned to Jim and I said, well, what did you tell her when she asked you what was going on? He said, well, I told her that we went to your seminar. And I said, there I learned that your love language was gifts. So he said, I just thought I would try it, that I'd give you a gift every day for a week and just see if it made any difference. And he looked at me and he said, I'll have to tell you, I was realizing it made a big difference. And she said, I turned to him and I said, but Jim, you can't keep giving me gifts every day. And he said, no, I know, I can't give them every day. He said, but maybe once a week. She said, Dr. Chapman, for the last 3 years, I don't think he's missed a single week. He's given me a gift every week for 3 years. She said, our whole marriage has been turned around. Well, I looked over at Jim and I said, well, wait a minute. Tell me, do you feel loved by her? He said, oh, Dr. Chapman, I've always felt loved. He said, she's the best housekeeper in the world. She's the best cook in the world. Now, you see, his language, acts of service, but her language was gifts. It turned the whole marriage around. So if this is your spouse's primary love language, I'm telling you, there's nothing more important to them than gifts. And the good news is you can speak this language. Now, if it's not their primary love language, I can tell you, if you're speaking their primary language, if you'll sprinkle in a few gifts along the way, not just for special occasions, but just every once in a while drop in a little gift, it'll be icing on the cake, okay? So this week, I'm not going to ask you to do one every day. I'll leave that up to you, but maybe do a little more this week than you would do in a normal week, okay? Just think gifts throughout this week.